Well,
Uh, With me
oh,
is April. How are you doing,
sorry.
April?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you doing
I'm doing
today?
pretty well. I'm not doing well. My virtual camera stopped working just seconds before the webinar went, so we've had to do a quick adjustment and modification. So it's always this way. It's always this way. It's never.
Technology.
It is
No.
never smooth. Well, welcome one and all. I'm looking forward to today's webinar. Today's webinar is an encore performance of our How to Succeed in Patreon webinar that we originally delivered a week ago today during our webinar Wednesday. But we've promoted this webinar to a broader audience than the normal Dotto Tech catchment area. We've actually promoted it and runs a bunch of Facebook ads. So I'm wondering, just out of curiosity, how many of you in the room right now have been to Webinar Wednesday before, one of our webinars, or how many of you, this is the first time that you've come to one of our webinars? If you can let me know in the chat, I would love to know. That would be just awesome to know exactly how many of you are here kind of for the first time. Oh, look at this. We've got lots of first time.
Awesome.
That's
Welcome,
what I thought.
Brian.
That's what we were hoping for. We were hoping for that. So consequently, to all of our regular Webinar Wednesday, the people who have been with us many times before, I apologize, but I'm going to talk a little bit about myself so that our new first timers know a little bit about who we are, so that we can kind of set our bona fides in place. My name's Steve Dotto, of course. I have the YouTube channel Dotto Tech, and we are content creators on YouTube primarily. My background, though, is television and radio. For a better part of 20 years, I did a TV show. I hosted and produced a nationally syndicated TV show in Canada on technology. It's the same type of content that we create for our YouTube channel, how-to technology, about how to use technology. And I also did a radio show over that period of time and wrote newspaper articles. About 10 years ago, actually it's a little bit longer now, it's 11 years ago, I transitioned from doing traditional broadcast to online. And we've been on a voyage of discovery ever since. So we moved and created our YouTube channel, which is a fairly successful how-to channel. We have something north of 350,000 subscribers right now on the channel, and it's been a joy for me. For me, the difference between doing traditional television and doing YouTube, what a world of difference. The YouTube has just been so great. Now, along the way, we started to deliver weekly tutorial webinars. We do. Later today, we'll be doing Webinar Wednesday, which we've done now 170 weekly tutorials, where we teach different aspects of online marketing, productivity, and content creation. And we created a Patreon account to support that as a part of the support for that. And it has done exceptionally well. It's been the Patreon account has been going now for 7 years. And we've been doing so we started the Patreon account before we just started doing the Webinar Wednesday, but it's been very well supported. And in fact, there's many of you here who are our patrons, and we want to say a big hello and shout out to you all as well. Look at that. I've got Brian here. I remember you from TV days. There we go, Brian, back in the day. Eric says he was a background actor in one of our TV shows. We used to have a studio, a kind of in-studio audience. We had a cafe set. And they got free coffee and like pastries instead of being paid to be on our show. Thanks for that, Eric. We appreciate it. At any rate, I discovered over the last few years just how wonderful Patreon is for content creators and people who do what we do, who create content, be it podcasts, be it videos, be it bloggers, authors, artists. We all face a real challenge in evening out our income and getting funding and being supported. Patreon is just such a great equalizer in that space. It gives your audience an opportunity to support you, your fans an opportunity to support you. So as a result, and I will explain it all in just a few moments, but as a result of the success that we've had, I wanted to make sure that other creators have the opportunity for the same kind of success. So that's what this webinar today is all about. So before we begin, before we get going, I would love to know from you what it is you're hoping to get out of today's webinar. So let me just call up the poll here, and let me just share a poll with you very quickly here. And there we go. What are you hoping to accomplish today in this? Are you a content creator and you want to get started on Patreon? Is that what's going to work for you? Are you a content creator? You've already been on Patreon, perhaps successfully, perhaps not successfully, but you were there. Are you not a content creator, but you're just curious about the entire process, about how it works and how it fits? That's good too. And the few that didn't quite read the promotional materials, they thought this was about Peloton. No, it's not a Peloton. It's a Patreon. So Peloton is not the answer. So we look at this. We've got 73% are content creators that want to use Patreon. That warms my heart, because that is who we've designed today's webinar for. That's who we've created the content for. So that's terrific. I'm glad to see that. So thank you all very much for sharing that with me right now. So here's what we want to do now. I am going to, I'm not too sure how I end the poll. I'll figure that out in a few moments. But while I'm going to jump over now, and we'd originally set up for me to be using a virtual camera so I could have the slides and myself on screen at the same time. But unfortunately, the gods stepped in, and just literally 10 minutes before we started, it stopped working. So I'm just going to share the slides with you right now. Actually, I can leave myself at the top. April, we can leave ourselves at the top of the screen for now. That's going to work.
Okay, it's up to you. Your call.
Good. That's going to work. It's going to work.
Right.
You don't have to stay on if you don't want to. I am going to stay on for the next few minutes. You can turn off your camera if you want. So let me fill you in on the webinar today and what we're going to be covering today within this webinar. Those of you who are new to us, who've never taken in one of our webinars before, we do what's called a hybrid webinar format here at Dotto Tech. I welcome you in live. We're all here live. I welcome you in, fill you in on what's going to happen. And then I have pre-recorded the main demonstration. That's so that I can give you as much value, so we can package as much value into that presentation as possible. While it's going on, we will be in chat. Both April and I will be in chat, answering as many of your questions as we can. That way, in the hour that we're going to spend together today, we can increase the information density. We can give you more answers on the fly while it's going on. And then once the webinar is over, once the pre-record is over, we'll come back and we'll answer as many of your questions live as we can through to the top of the hour. So that's the style of webinar that we do. Those of you who participated in our webinar Wednesday recognize that format. This week, because we are also going to be talking about a brand new product that we're going to be launching, there'll be an additional kind of slideshow at the very end of the webinar, at the end of the video, where I share the new Patreon bootcamp, which we'll be talking about in a few moments. So that's the big change. That's the one thing that's kind of a little bit different about what we do from what we normally do here on Dotto Tech, and as far as Webinar Wednesday goes. So that is an overview of everything that we're going to be covering. Now, let me go through quickly just as what the expectations we're going to be trying to meet today. And as I mentioned with the questions that I asked off the top, the main focuses of this training is really to help Patreon creators, or help creators understand how Patreon can help you form a better connection with your community and audience. You know, all of us creators are looking for funding models, and we naturally consider things like membership sites and digital products and online courses as a good option to generate income for us. And they all are. Those are all good fits. I want to share with you today how Patreon fits in that mix. So if you have, or you're building a platform and you want to generate ongoing income, then you can be sure that you are in the right place. I'm going to be talking about Patreon from a content creator's perspective. And I know many of you have only seen Patreon in the past from a supporter's perspective, but we're going to be looking at things from the other side, from the creator's perspective. So now my goals for today are thus. When we're done, I intend for you to understand the strengths of Patreon and the weaknesses as well from a creator's perspective. And if you are a creator, I hope that you're going to learn just how Patreon may fit for you. I want to spark that imagination and kind of allow you to put yourself in the place of what would happen if I launched a Patreon campaign myself. How would that feel, and what would it look like, and what could it possibly do for me? It's really important that we all understand those differences I was talking about a moment ago, the difference between Patreon, membership sites, and learning management tools. So we're going to be exploring that to make sure we understand where each one fits in our business. And I'm also going to talk to you about how you can start to put a plan in place to launch your own Patreon campaign. And finally, we are announcing a Patreon bootcamp, which is starting next week, which is a great place for creators to learn from me exactly how to launch and create a Patreon campaign, which will be successful. So that is the details. When it's done, you're going to know what Patreon is, how it's different, the fundamental difference between Patreon and those other sites. You're going to have had a tour of Patreon. You'll understand what the costs are involved. You'll understand my 4 keys to success on Patreon, because I boiled it down to 4 real keys. And I've got one extra special bonus. I'll actually take you through. Everybody has a question of how much money can they make, and it's really difficult to translate what you can do on Patreon and from your following, to kind of figure out how many people you have on your newsletter list or in your subscribe to your podcast. But we have an equation that you can work with that will give you, I think, a really accurate starting point of what you can expect to generate on Patreon. That is a bonus, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. So we're talking about real actionable information that you can take to the bank right now. So let us get started. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back into here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to fire up that video I was talking about. This is 35 minutes. While it's going on, April and I will be in the chat answering as many of your questions as we can. If you don't see the chat right now, it's because I'll have to stop the poll for money. So you'll see the chat if you can't see the chat in your window right now. But we'll get going with the video.
Chat.
Sorry?
They can see the chat.
All right.
You can see the chat. Yep, you're good.
All right. We will see you guys on the other side of the video. 35 minutes. You're going to have a great idea of how Patreon fits by that time. I've been using Patreon for a very long time. I do believe I am qualified to be classified as OG. Now, I've distilled the steps towards success on Patreon, I believe, into 4 keys. This is pure gold if you are a content creator. Now, I'm not going to tell you that this is the only route to success on Patreon, but I am going to tell you that if you possess these 4 keys, then you can unlock the secret to recurring, reliable revenue on Patreon. So before we get started, though, I want to set the stage and also set some expectations. First of all, the opinions that I'm sharing here are my opinions, my ideas. They are not Patreon's, nor are they anyone else's. It is on me, the opinion that is being shared here today. And it's based on my experience after 7 years on Patreon. I launched my Patreon page in April of 2014, so that is a little bit over 7 years ago now. And Patreon itself was only formed in May of 2014, so I was on board before the service was even 1 full year old. As I said, that does confer upon me OG status. Now, over that time, I've modified my account strategy several times as I've learned what works and what does not work on Patreon. But Patreon has consistently been there for us. And over 7 years, it has generated over $400,000 in income so far. That is significant. And it continues to provide, to be one of my financial pillars, generating income reliably, month after month. And I got to tell you, as a creator, being able to count on consistent, reliable income, it's a godsend. It is really taken a lot of pressure off of me. So I want to start by getting on the same page with our terms, because I'll be using a few terms over and over again. And I want to make sure that we have absolute clarity between us what I'm referring to with these terms. And the first term is creators. I've been using it already a lot. Creators are those of us who create some content as a part of our online business. Content can be videos or podcasts or blog posts or live streams or more traditional offerings like music, artwork, animation, books, graphic novels. Content can be training, it can be instruction, it can be motivational, or it can be advice-based. It can be educational or entertaining, or both, hopefully both. And creators, our first term, were defined by the content that we create. Where creators distribute and share their content is our next term. That term is platform. And like a political platform, it's made kind of up of planks. Your social networks, your mail list, everybody's platform looks a little bit different, but it's the places that your content is shared. Personally, for me, my platform is first and foremost my YouTube channel, then my podcast, our webinars. This webinar here is a part of our platform, my mail list. Those are the places where I'm well established and I reach out to my community and I've built an audience. That is my platform. You will know what your platform is because it's the place where you publish your content. And then patrons, well, there are supporters, but we can also look at them as members of our membership. But one thing I never consider patrons to be, and we will talk more about this later, is customers. Patrons appreciate and they consume the content that we create, and they see value in that content and are willing to, or hopefully happy, to pay to support us in the creation of that content. And finally, this is one of the terms that I struggle with the most. Maybe it's just an internal an internal switch for me. But campaigns and pages, they're kind of interchangeable terms in the Patreon world. They are the offer that Patreon creators make to their patrons. They're the perks and their benefits. Now, we sometimes call them your Patreon page because there's an anchor page on Patreon where you share all of the details. And this is where people sign up to support you. So we often end up what we call our Patreon offering, our Patreon page. And how we support our community and how we grow it, kind of the strategy behind it, that's our Patreon campaign. It's the mechanism that encourages people to support us. So when Patreon creators talk to each other, we use these terms interchangeably. We refer to our Patreon accounts as campaigns or pages. And I just think that can sometimes be confusing. So when I talk about Patreon pages and campaigns, I'm really talking about the account that we have and how it moves forward. Patreon was originally launched because there's always been a disconnect between creators and their fans. It was envisioned by Jack Conte, who was frustrated by how musicians were being treated by the major players online. And musicians are in many ways the poster child of Patreon. Historically, they've been taken advantage of by middleman after middleman. In the advent of the internet, though, and streaming music service, it threatened to break the hold of major record labels, so musicians could, for the first time, see a new path forward, only, unfortunately, to have that path hijacked by iTunes and other gatekeepers. So Patreon was born out of that frustration that, yet again, creators were being held hostage by these gatekeepers. Access to their fans was managed through this middleman. iTunes is kind of the black hat in this particular round. So the goal was to create a mechanism to give creators direct access to their fans. Of course, the more cynical amongst us will point out that one middleman, say iTunes, has been replaced by another middleman, Patreon. After all, what is Patreon if not a middleman? That's a fair point. But transparency and control are the key. You see, when a creator has a relationship with Patreon, they know upfront what Patreon's cut is going to be. The creators set their own prices and their own benefits. Creators also can download their supporter list at any time, email them directly, and have direct conversations with them. This is huge. You see, Patreon controls the platform, but the creators control the content and the relationship. Now, there's always going to be some friction, of course, but this is vastly different than what came before. So let me explain it again, just because it is so important. Unlike Facebook or Instagram or YouTube or TikTok or any other social platform, and unlike Amazon or Audible or iTunes or Spotify or any other service, the creator owns the relationship. A publisher on YouTube cannot download their list of email addresses from YouTube and directly reach out to them. A publisher on Patreon can. The Patreon creator owns the relationship, whereas Patreon owns the platform. So let's start by looking at how we fit into Patreon. And I think there's three kind of creator archetypes in Patreon, and I'm going to share them with you. And I think almost all creators fall into one or sometimes more than one of these three broad categories, but these are broadly the way that Patreon campaigns are run. The first is education, and it's training, course-based skills. Now, those courses can be on anything. They can be on art or music or programming. They can be DIY, home improvement, or the like. They can be academically focused on math or writing. And we will lump all of these creators into the knowledge category, creators who create knowledge products. Next are premium or gated content. These are typically podcasts, serial stories. They could be video series. They could be a series of stories, or they could be a book that's being released chapter by chapter, a serial story that's being released chapter by chapter. It can be music. It's content that the patron is paying for the production of, and they're going to consume primarily from an entertainment point of view. They are looking to be entertained. So this is the closest thing to Patreon being a Netflix or a YouTube, where we're delivering entertainment-based content to the community, which is gated. It's gated and it's not there for the general public the term gated means. It's not there for the general public, but it's only there for the enjoyment and for the benefit of the patrons. It's behind some sort of we would call it a paywall if we were talking about a newspaper or a podcast that was being published directly, but it's behind the Patreon paywall at that particular point. It's behind the membership wall in Patreon. And where these really work well is when you have a repository of older content. We often will see podcasters only have, say, their last 5 episodes of the podcast available to the public, but they have a back catalog of maybe hundreds of podcasts that are just available to their patrons. It's a terrific model for that. And then the third business model is fan sites. It's access. It's about having a relationship with the creator. And it's all about increased interaction and access to that creator. Now, this can be A, B, or C-list celebrities, as well as specialized content. Now, how can I put this? Adult content, not safe for work. It's where the artist is giving direct access, intimate access sometimes, to themselves, to their patrons, and to their community. Now, the key to this type of site or this type of Patreon account is backstage access to the creator and early access to the content. Now, other examples might be musicians releasing their songs on Patreon a week or two before they publish them on iTunes or Spotify or on YouTube, for example. We also see fans of TV shows that are looking for more detailed backstage access. So hosting live shows after the broadcast of the show, fan sites, creating fan fiction around it, having occasional stars from the shows coming on. But it's all very much access to the celebrity based or access to the creator based. Those are fan sites. And there have to be thousands, literally thousands of models of this type of site. But now I want to take a quick step back because it's not a perfect world in Patreon. And now I don't necessarily want to throw cold water on everybody as they imagine these different business models working great for them. But the reality of a Patreon account can sometimes be somewhat sobering. In fact, currently only 8% of creators earn over $500 per month on Patreon. This was the statistic that got me started and got me down the path of wanting to teach people how to use Patreon more effectively. Only 8% of creators earn over $500 per month, and only 4% reach $1,000 per month. But once they hit those marks, there's remarkably little churn and just steady growth. So once you kind of get past that, past the tipping point, you're in great shape. But only 8% get past that first tipping point. So I've got a question for you. Does that number encourage you or discourage you? Here's my take. When I saw these numbers, I asked myself, what separates the 4% from the rest? And to me, the difference is actually pretty clear. Successful Patreon creators understand the Patreon difference, first and foremost. They understand how Patreon is different from other funding models, and they lean into that difference. So I believe that one of the reasons 92% of the creators earn under $500 a month is they really don't understand what Patreon is and how it's different. So let's go there now. Specifically, the first question is, how is Patreon different from the main other funding models? I'm speaking of membership sites and LMSs or learning management tools. So let's begin by talking about the similarities, because there are a lot of similarities. Patreon shares a lot of the features with membership tools like Kajabi or Mighty Networks, and a lot with the learning management tools like Thinkific or Teachable. Now, a lot of the mechanical process of signing up members, delivering rich content, it can be accomplished by either of these services. And in some cases, the other services that we're talking about do so more affordably than Patreon. They might be a better choice. So this is a big part of your decision journey. If you're considering Patreon, you need to understand what the nature is of Patreon that makes it different from the nature of the typical publisher on one of those other platforms. And I believe that the biggest difference between Patreon and all of these other services is on Patreon, you have supporters. On the other platforms, you have customers. There is a world of difference. In a membership site or a traditional course, you get paid for the content that you've created. People are buying it from you. They are your customers. The deliverable is the content that you've created. However, patrons support the creator's efforts to create the content, and the reward they get is called a perk. It's not necessarily purchasing access to the content, but it's being given a perk, a benefit over and above. As a result, patrons are vested in the success of the creators that they support because they feel like they're part of the process. They aren't purchasing the result. I'll speak from my personal experience because we have both models in our business. And in our Thinkific account, which is an LMS account, we have over 14,000 students. And I'm very proud of that. And I feel very strongly about those customers who support us and are on those platforms. But the 800 patrons who have stepped up to support me on Patreon and said, we support and value you and we want to contribute to help you make more content. Well, they hold a very different and a very special relationship with me. I'm of the opinion that most Patreon creators see their patrons in a very different light than they see their traditional customers, and most patrons hold their creators that they support in higher esteem as well. You know, they're your 100 raving fans, and a fan is a good term to use for what a patron is, because they're supporting you because of what you do, not because of what you've done. I hope that makes sense. Then there's also mechanical differences between Patreon membership sites and learning management tools. Patreon, one of the benefits of Patreon is it's so easy to manage. So that creators can actually end up spending more time creating content and nurturing their relationships and less time administering their community. And there are very few add-ons. You have to make very few decisions as you set up a Patreon account. Very few design decisions. Patreon is pretty much, it's kind of locked in one sort of format. So you can concentrate on the content you create for it rather than designing the environment that your patrons are visiting. And patrons will find it very easy to navigate because Patreon has taken on the responsibility of building a logical user access system that makes it easy for the patrons to get through it. Now, with membership sites, you can spend as much time troubleshooting the technology as creating and delivering content. And I speak from personal experience, and anybody who has installed a membership plugin in WordPress knows exactly what I'm talking about. You spend a lot of time administering your users. Membership tools and learning management services, frankly, are amazing. I still use them both, but for different purposes. But I can assure you, we spend a lot of time and energy administering those membership tools, time that we could be spending creating more content that our community craves and that actually ends up making us money. Patreon lets us keep our eye on the ball, concentrating our efforts on the content and not necessarily on the management. Now let's get into how Patreon actually works. There are three main elements to Patreon. There's the feed, the perks, and then there are tiers. First of all, the feed. When you set up a Patreon account, you get your own private feed. It's sort of like Facebook's news feed or Instagram's feed. Creators post content and your patrons can view, they can download, they can interact with that content because they can respond to it in a variety of ways. And so the feed really feels very similar to the Facebook feed, and you and your patrons will feel instantly comfortable with the feed. It's very nicely executed within Patreon. Perks, those are the rewards that you offer your supporters. And also typically a creator has multiple tiers of perks. And those tiers of perks are our collection. The tiers themselves are a collection of the perks based on the different pledges that patrons are providing. So you can actually take several perks together and deliver those to your patrons who are paying at a slightly higher level. I think what we should do right now is I should just break away from the slideshow for a minute and let's dive into my Patreon dashboard and just show you the back end of Patreon a little bit so you can see what the creator sees as they interact with their patrons. Okay, this is the Patreon creators dashboard. The dashboard is the control center for patrons, for Patreon creators to be able to manage their Patreon account. Down the left-hand side, we have all of our navigation. In the center, you see an instant snapshot of where you stand statistically as far as revenue and the number of patrons you have. Any messages that you should be addressing are shared here. So this gives you a really good overview to manage your entire account. You create new content and publish new content over here in this sidebar. You can create new posts, which we were just talking about as far as the feed goes. You can go in and you can manage the relationship that you have with all of your patrons, including including doing things like downloading their email address and gaining direct access to them, which is one of the most important things that we talked about. And here is a very important section, which is the page itself. As I said off the beginning, we often interchange the word Patreon page with our account, but this is where you go to actually set up things like the different tiers that you have available to your patrons, how much it costs for them to get that tier, and you set what perks and what benefits they have within the page in each one of the tiers. So here's our main tier, which is our $10 tier, and you can see down the bottom we have all of the different benefits that they get as a result of that tier, and you can add or subtract different perks based on the tier level. So this interface is what I was talking about that gives you total control over your Patreon account. You can go into your payment settings, you can communicate with your patrons, you can talk to Patreon itself, dealing with your account, you can add features like adding merchandise, you can edit the outward-facing content that you're sharing with your patrons, you can publish content. Everything happens within this creator dashboard. And when I say it's simple, it is very simple in comparison with managing your content in any other type of site, the Patreon dashboard. So let's talk costs now. And I won't spend too much time on this particular area, but Patreon is free to join. But as any middleman will do, they are going to take their percentage as a percentage of each patron's payment. Now, there are 3 different tiers or 3 different levels depending on how many features you want to have within your Patreon account. And each of those levels gives you some more functionality, some more perks, and some more tools for interacting with your patrons. Over time, you'll learn which ones are valuable to you and which ones aren't. But basically, it's going to cost you anywhere from about 5% at the kind of the basic level, all the way up to 12% of the patron's payments to you in order to use the service on Patreon. And this is a little bit of a misnomer because you also have to add on top of this 2.9%, typically speaking, for the credit card clearing. So it's actually going to cost you anywhere about between 8% and 15% is going to be how much you're going to be paying to be on Patreon. Patreon won't get that whole cut, but that's what it will cost you. That's what you'll have to shave off of your the payments that your patrons are making to you to recognize what's actually going to be transferred into your bank account. Okay, we've gotten through all of the basics. I think it is time to get into what I promised you, which are what are the 4 keys to success on Patreon. Are you ready? Let's go. The first key to success on Patreon is platform, the term that I used early on. If you have an existing platform, and by that I mean a podcast, a video channel, you are creating content and you have a following. If that is the case, you have a chance for success on Patreon because we have a cart horse situation on Patreon. You can use Patreon to monetize your existing content and platform if you have one, but it needs to be established first. You can't launch a successful Patreon campaign if you don't already have an audience. You can't do them in parallel. And this is one of the biggest and most common mistakes I see is launching a Patreon campaign too early. If you have a platform, you can move on to number 2. But so often I will hear people say, I'm launching a podcast and I'm going to pay for it on Patreon, and they have 0 followers on the podcast and they have 0 patrons, and they plunge ahead with both and they succeed in neither. The reason is platform comes first. If you have a platform in place, a successful platform, you already have relevance in your potential patrons' life. You're providing them some baseline value. We increase that value and we cement our relationship through perks that we offer. And it is, as I say, a lot of fun to figure out what you can offer your fans. Basically, perks are going to fall into 5 broad categories: access, engagement, recognition, digital bonuses, or physical goods. Those are the prime kind of the prime things that we can offer as perks. And I can give you lots of different examples. You can read through the list here, but you'll recognize a lot of different perks. Early access to content, custom content that you create, say a podcast that you release just for your patrons, photos that you share with them backstage that nobody else gets. You can have live streams. You can have Ask Me Anythings, or you can have online sessions for them. You can do shout outs to them. You can follow them in social. There are all these different perks that you can offer your patrons. We here at Dotto Tech, for our patrons that follow us on Webinar Wednesday, we give them access to our Webinar Wednesday archives, a real tangible benefit with that back catalog, which I spoke about earlier. Figuring out the perk mix is one of the really most important steps that creators have to determine in order to find success on Patreon. And we don't always hit the ball out of the park on the first effort. I think I've been through about 4 different iterations over my 7 years to find the sweet spot of what I should really be offering my patrons that really resonates with them. It's a learned process, but there are a lot of great examples that will get you thinking about what's going to work and what's not going to work. Establishing tiers. What we do is we mix and match the different perks that we have into packages for our patrons to choose. And those packages are called tiers. So typically speaking, we ladder up value. So for example, you might give somebody at $5 level an access to an ad-free version of a podcast. If they go to the $10 level, you may give them a ad-free version. You give them always what's available in the lower tier perk, but then you add a monthly live stream and Ask Me Anything, where you answer whatever questions they ask you. And then if you get to the $20 level, you get both of the previous perks, but maybe we send you a piece of merchandise, a limited edition hat, something along that line. That's how the perks get tiered. And then you let your patrons decide what level they want to support you at. This brings us to our third key, which is ever so important. With Patreon, how you start, how you get out of the gate is very important. So planning a great launch strategy is essential, because it's almost a double-edged sword. If you have a platform in place already, you only get one chance to launch to that platform. So the fact that you've already got a bunch of people there that are supporting you, the very first time that you present Patreon to them is going to be the most important time, because they're already following you. They're already your fans. They are your potential audience, and you've got to pitch them properly the first time, because you might never get a second chance. If they say no to Patreon the first time you pitch, they might never return and take a look even after you've changed the perks. So you need to come up with a very successful, very on-point launch strategy when you first start Patreon. And fortunately, there are some great models to use, especially one superior model, I believe, and I will talk more about that in a few moments. The final stage of success for Patreon, the final key, is nurturing our community. We work so hard to gain the support of our patrons, and it behooves us to do everything we can to nurture that relationship. And much of that nurturing comes from how well we deliver all the perks that we've promised. Just like a social platform, consistency and reliability is essential. Meeting your publishing schedule, responding quickly to questions and problems, being visible in your membership area, expressing genuine concern and appreciation for your community. All of these foster a deeper relationship with your community, which provides even greater security for you. But if you've got all 4 of these keys in place, then Patreon can provide a terrific income vehicle for your platform. For us, it's one of the pillars of business. Now, this gets fun. If you have all 4 keys in place, you have a platform, you believe that you're ready, how much can you really earn, Steve? Tell me the truth. You've thrown out some numbers, that $500 and $1,000, and we know you earn more. How much can a creator really expect to earn? So let us do the math. I've worked out a model that you can plug in your numbers, and I think you can come up with a very accurate expectation of what Patreon can do for you. Are you ready for it? We're going to switch over. We're going to jump onto my iPad so I can sketch out the equation for you. All right, I've got my iPad open here. Let's do the math. Let's figure out exactly what you can expect based on your platform as far as income from Patreon in a reasonable world. And I think the most important figure to start with, the baseline number that we need to establish, is how many people you have on your mail list. If we look at the mail list, I think we can extrapolate from the mail list a really accurate idea of what we can expect to generate on Patreon. So we'll start with how many email subscribers do you have? And we will, for this particular case, you have to excuse my handwriting. I know it's terrible. You have to, for this particular case, we'll say you have 10,000 subscribers. That's a reasonable number of email subscribers to have on a mail list, but it also represents a number that's really easy for us to extrapolate other numbers based on what your own personal numbers are. Now, if you have 10,000 subscribers on your email list, the first question I ask is, how many of those are real fans? How many of those are your most strong followers? You know, that the raving fans that we would call them. And the 80-20 rule really comes into play here. If you have a mail list of 10,000 people, you probably recognize, if you look at your statistics, that 2,000 of those people will open most of your emails. They will sign up for your webinars. They are your engaged audience. Those are the people who you have an opportunity to increase the relationship with, because I would call those 2,000 people fans. And this math works out. I'll show you later on in my own mail list how accurate this is. And this carries through for pretty much everybody. That means that 8,000 of those people are soft. They aren't necessarily, they're followers. They aren't really committed to you yet. They're fans. They are the ones that unsubscribe, or they don't stay on your mail list for all time, and they don't open all of your emails. But those 2,000 fans, that's the group that we're going to start to work with. The number that I want to work out is, of those 2,000 fans that you have, of those 2,000 people that open all of your emails, that are your true fans, what is a reasonable percentage of those people to expect will actually support you on Patreon if you put together an offering which appeals to them? Is it 10%? I think that's pretty reasonable. Is it 20%? That might be even more reasonable. So if we look at probably somewhere between 10 and 20% of those followers will convert to support you on Patreon, that means that you can start by considering right at the beginning that you could have, say, between 200 and 400 Patreon supporters just from your existing list. I think that's a very reasonable expectation. So now let us continue and let's work out the next phase of math. So statistics will tell us that on Patreon, the average contribution of a patron to a creator is $7. That is the average Patreon contribution. The average creator gets, it's actually between $7 and $12, but $7 is kind of at the low end of that scale. So let's say that you have 200 fans who will convert at $7 per month, or $7 per event on Patreon to support you. What does the math work out to? And at that point there, you have 200 times 7 is $1,400 per month. That already puts you in the top 4% of support on Patreon, just if 10% of your fans support you. Have I overstated? Do you think that 10% of your fans is a excessive or a high number to expect support from? How does the math work if we go to, say, 5% or even 2.5%? Based on the other numbers that we've illustrated. So at 5% times is 100 followers, which will equal $700 per month. And of course, 2.5% will be half of that. So it'll be $350 per month. Now, do you need some proof? Let's go through and let's take a look at and see if we can prove some of these numbers out to you. So I'm going to take you into my real numbers. I'm going to completely pull back the curtains and show you that this math works. So first of all, this is my Infusionsoft, my Keep account. And you can see here that we currently have 35,715 subscribers. So let's just mark this down. Let's mark this down as 35,000, we'll just say round it out to 35,000 email subscribers on our list. That's first proof number one. We're going to use that as our baseline number. But before we do that, I want to go in and I want to show you some of our email open rate statistics. If I go in and view our existing email that we send out. Now, we send out some specialized emails that are just for certain vertical groups, but the ones I want to show you are our This Week in Dotto Tech. Those are our general emails that go out to our entire mail list. So here is a week ago, This Week in Dotto Tech. If we scroll across, we see there open rate 20%. Bang on with what I said as far as the 80-20 rule. If you want more proof, let's go down to another Dotto Tech this week, going back in February, 19%, right within the margin of error. Go down to Dotto Tech this week, 22%. it proves out. These statistics prove out. 20% is our average open rate. We have 20% of our fans. The 80-20 rule works as far as I'm concerned. So let's see if the proof is in the pudding. Let's go over now and let's take a look at my Patreon page. And on my Patreon page, we'll see that we currently have $6,200 per month. Now, as I record this, it's just after the beginning of the month, so the number always drops a little bit. But the total revenue that we're earning now, U.S. funds, that is coming into my platform on Patreon, is $6,200 per month. Let's run the numbers and see if my equation works. All right, let us take those real world numbers and apply them to the equation that I shared with you earlier and see if the math works. So based on our verifiable numbers, we have 35,000 subscribers to the mail list at Dotto Tech, and I am earning $6,200 per month currently on Patreon based on those numbers. So what was the equation? The first one was the 80-20 rule. And 20% of 35,000 is 7,000 fans. 7,000 fans. Now, what did we say the ratio was? We had 20%. We expected between 10 and 20% of those to convert into supporting us on Patreon. So 10% of 7,000 is 700 subscribers on Patreon or Patreon supporters. To 20% would be 1,400 supporters on Patreon. Just by way of example, we're currently at 755 patrons as of this moment, as I record this. So again, the math is proving out just over 10%. We said that the average support on Patreon is $7 per supporter. Let's do the math now. $7 times 700 subscribers equals $4,900. That's at the low end of what support we could expect based on 35,000 subscribers on our mail list. At the high end, at 20%, we can basically double that times 1,400. And that math then works out to $9,800. In the real world, what numbers do we really have? We have $6,200. $6,200 in support, right smack in the middle between the $4,900 at 10% and the $8,900 that would be at 20%, or $9,800, excuse me, that would be at 20%. The math works. This equation is accurate. If you can define exactly how large your mail list is and you build a successful Patreon campaign, a well thought out Patreon campaign, you can expect to generate monthly recurring revenue in that sort of a range. It gets pretty exciting, doesn't it? So as you can see, the math works. You can determine, I think, very accurately what you can expect to receive in Patreon support based on the size and following you have of your mail list. All right, that is it for this. Does this excite you? Does this intrigue you? If so, I have some exciting news. So let's go back to me live now and continue on. All right, so sorry about the technical glitches, but that's the way it's rolling today. I can promise you guys one thing. When we send out the replay, I will edit the perfect replay without any technical issues into the replay, so that when you watch the replay, you'll be able to see you'll be able to see it, even if the recording is slightly buggered up. It won't matter, because we'll make sure that you have a clean replay sent to you, and that will be sent this afternoon. We'll send it out sometime this afternoon. I also want to address one elephant in the room. First time we did this webinar, I recognized that a lot of people thought that I was saying you need at least 10,000 subscribers on your email list in order to be successful on Patreon. No, the issue is, I want you to take from this, 10,000 is a easy number to extrapolate. If you have 1,000, you simply take 10% of the number that I shared. So 1,000 Patreon supporters would be between, $490 and $1,000 per month in support. Does that make sense? Based on that equation. And there's always going to be variations. The number of, if you have a small but super engaged community, you can look at the higher end. If you are looking at a community, which somebody mentioned they are on Twitter, or if you have them following on YouTube, not a mail list, but you have subscribers to one of your social platforms, you're going to look at a lower percentage because they're going to be less engaged. So, but it gives you a model that I think is realistic. I hate it when people throw, you can get multiple 6 digits or multiple 5-digit income. I hate those sort of airy-fairy pie in the sky numbers. What I tried to share with you in this equation is real world statistics that you can actually take to the bank, and it'll give you a realistic snapshot of what you can expect. So yes, and by the way, there's an email sequence which is following this. And in that email sequence that I'm going to be sending you over the next few days, I have a link to you can download the entire, we've built the calculator as a model for you. That you can download a spreadsheet, you can plug in your own numbers. That is going to be sent to you. So make sure you open your emails, because that is coming in the follow-up sequence. I think it's gold. You can tell I'm proud of how it worked out, because I spent so much time trying to figure out how to share that part of the story, because it's so important. You have to decide if you're going to invest in it, and you have to have a realistic expectation. The worst thing is to have unrealistic expectations and to be disappointed. That crushes our spirit, does it not? So let me get on with my sales part of this, because darn it all, this is a sales and a pitch webinar. Let me tell you what we've done. If you found what we just covered to be exciting, and I hope you did, then this may be for you. And I am announcing that we are starting a Patreon boot camp. It's 30 days to successful Patreon launch. I put this program together, pulling together all 7 years of experience that I have on Patreon. And I've coached many successful Patreon creators. But I wanted to create a system that you can rely on to take all of your hard work developing your platform and successfully launch it on Patreon. And I believe this is a great program. Now, I don't want to spend too much time selling you on the whole bootcamp idea, because we're already coming close to the hour, and I want to get a few questions in. But essentially, I want to fill you in on how the bootcamp is going to work. It starts next Monday. It lasts for 30 days. We deliver lessons 5 days a week, work days, business days. Every weekday we drop one new training, 20 lessons in total. And every Friday we have a live lesson. So 4 pre-recorded lessons, 1 live session per week. The modules are, for the most part, are fairly short, none of them are 8 minutes yet, 12 minutes average. There is one longer module, which is when we teach you how to do a launch, and I'll explain that in a moment. Now, the boot camp isn't for everyone. We're only offering it to creators who are ready to take advantage, who have a mature enough offering that they can actually have a real good chance of success on Patreon. So you have to have a platform in place. You can't be building your platform. It has to be in place, because we're not teaching you how to build the platform at this point. We're not teaching you how to grow your mail list. We're teaching you how to leverage your existing platform. So there's actually going to be an approval process. If you decide you want to sign up for the bootcamp, you're going to have to fill out an application form, which we will evaluate very quickly, just to make sure that we can deliver the value that we want to you within the course. And the focus is going to be, we're going to take a look back on those 4 keys that I talked about. If we look at those, we really start the Patreon bootcamp at the second key. The first key is platform. We're not covering platform. We're going to start by teaching you how to build your perks, how to build out your Patreon offerings so that you can create the value for your patrons to make it, to excite them and to get them on board. Then we're going to teach you how to launch your Patreon campaign, how to plan a launch, and how to have a successful launch, because that is so important. And then nurturing your Patreon following. It's really designed to take you from, if you have a platform, right through the whole execution of a Patreon launch. And I'm also make sure that I identify all of the pitfalls and traps that many Patreon creators fall into. And now for the kicker. This is awesome. We're going to host the entire bootcamp inside of Patreon. Patreon's a perfect delivery platform for this because of the way the feed works. So you will experience both sides of the Patreon experience. As a member of the bootcamp, you will be in Patreon at the way that your supporters will be, and you'll be able to experience it from that side while we teach you how to manage the administrative side. I think it's a stroke of genius. All comments, questions, suggestions, all going to be shared in the feed, which is, there's multiple benefits to having it set up that way. So I'm not going to go through the content that we're going to be covering. You can read the slide very quickly, but we are short on time. You're just going to have to trust the fact, I think, that we have put so much thought into the creation of this course, and that we cover all aspects as we go through the modules. There is a 7-day money back guarantee. From the time the course starts, if you don't find value in that first week, we have a refund period that ends at the end of the first week. So there's no risk to you if you decide to sign up. You can pull out of it at the end of the first week, but after that, everybody's in for the long haul. You can see all of the different content that we're going to be covering. We cover everything from how you create your content, how you manage your Patreon account, and now also very important, how you manage yourself and your relationship with your patrons to avoid burnout and because Patreon customers burn us out. Patrons we feel even more indebted to, and so we have to set proper barriers in place and expectations in place for our patrons and also for ourselves to make sure we can continue to deliver and we don't go through burnout. Anybody who's a YouTube creator, a podcaster, or a blogger, we all experience burnout at some point. We all experience that stress. Last thing we need to do is layer on more in Patreon. So we're going to teach you the techniques to avoid burning out, because that would be the worst thing to do. I got to tell you, I'm really excited about this. One of the other aspects that is going to be so amazing with this program is you're going to be working with other creators that are at your same level, your peers. Because of the way we're delivering the course content in the Patreon newsfeed, it means that you're going to be sharing ideas and suggestions and supporting each other creators. So if you're a podcaster, you're going to be learning from bloggers and YouTubers and artists, and you're going to be exchanging ideas back and forth, and it's going to be a rising tide. I love the idea that we're all going to be collaboratively working on this through the entire process. Of course, I'll be part of the process as well. So I think it's going to be a terrific environment. It's going to be a special month. We are accepting applications right now. April is dropping the link into the page. Now, you've only got a short time to decide on this. We are closing the doors on Saturday midnight, so that I have Sunday to go through the final applications and enroll everybody, because the first lesson drops on Monday morning, May 17th. And when the doors are closed for this, they're closed. We're not going to be accepting anybody late, because we want you to go through as a cohort. You're going to be going through all together in time. Cost. Of course, you're all wondering how much it costs. The cost is $5.99. And that's one of the reasons the calculator was so important to go through, because you have to determine, if you take a look at what your potential income is, you can make a really intelligent and good decision whether or not this investment is appropriate at this time for your platform. If you have 1,000 or 2,000 email subscribers, when you do the math, you're going to say, chances are you'll look at it and say, I can pay off this investment in the first 2 months of my Patreon campaign. In that case, it's probably a good investment. If it's not, if it doesn't look like it's going to pay off, then it's not a good investment. But I think for a lot of you, it will be a good investment. Now, I don't offer, those of you that have followed me for a long time know, we don't have a whole bunch of bonuses that we add in to add extra pressure or anything else. We have one price. We do have one discount that's available, and it's available to 2 different groups. If you're one of my existing patrons, you get one of the perks of being one of our patrons, and there are many of you here. It's available at half price. And our Grey Wave members, we have a membership where we're teaching people how to build their online platforms. They also have access to it at half price. But the patrons, though, still need to go through the approval process before they're signed up, but they will get that discount. And I'm going to summarize: 20 lessons, 4 interactive sessions, community access, daily feedback from me and the team for the entire month. I hope you can see why I'm excited about this. I'm going to give a whole bunch of talented creators a source of ongoing funding, the source that they deserve, the security that I have from Patreon. I'm so looking forward to passing that on to the next generation of creators, so you can take advantage of it too. I got to tell you, as a creator, going from the feast and famine world of product launches, etc., to this steady income that comes month after month on Patreon, it has been such a balm to me, and it's given me so much confidence and reduced the stress and the pressure that I've experienced as an online entrepreneur. It can do that for you as well, and I hope it will. So with that, I think we better jump in to the Q&A, and let's get April on screen with me, and let's go through it. I have to apologize. We are at the top of the hour already, so we'll extend this session for those of you who are willing to stay with us, and we'll answer as many of the questions as we can. For those of you who have to leave right now, the entire Q&A will be included in the replay. So if you want to hear the questions, but you have other things planned, you can just fast forward in the replay to the 1 hour mark, and you'll be able to pick it up from here to be able to listen to all the questions as we go through and answer the questions. So how does that sound? April, are you coming in? Did I lose you? I hope I didn't put her to sleep.
No, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yay!
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Coming.
You weren't quite ready. So do we have lots of questions? I haven't been checking the chat out for the last little while. Has it been good?
It has been good. Yes. I just, hold on one second. It was blipping here on me, and for some reason the URL that I had put in, so I just wanted to make sure that it double caught. So I'm putting it back in here. So sorry about that, guys.
No worries. So let's go through and answer as many questions as we can. Oh, do you want me to do this?
So Murray had, Murray had a great question. Thoughts on Patreon recently dropping creators for political reasons. Others in my team have suggested we look at locals as a platform because we deal in satire.
So I don't think that just satire alone is going to be a good enough reason. Some creators, first of all, just as a backstory, Patreon is facing the same challenges as YouTube and Facebook. With the current political climate and the misinformation and the us and them mentality that unfortunately has undertaken much of the world, Patreon determined that there were certain creators who were spreading hatred, basically, and they said, you can't do that on our platform. But Patreon still allows not the adult content. They even allow conspiracy content on board. Well, what I would call conspiracy, but there's several QAnon podcasts that are still supported and funded on Patreon. So the people who they booted off the platform, they felt they had a real reason for it, and it has caused a backlash. There's no doubt that there's a political conversation to have and a freedom of speech conversation, but they are in the same position as YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and the other social platforms as far as that's concerned. That's one of the reasons, by the way, that our final lesson that we teach is what's your Patreon exit strategy. If you invest and you build up a marketplace on Patreon and the social climate changes so that it ends up being untenable for you, you have to have an exit strategy. In Patreon, you can have. On YouTube, Twitter, you can't have an exit strategy. But Patreon will allow you to download all of your email addresses and reach out to your creators, to your supporters independently. So there is an exit strategy. I suspect that there's no way in the world that your content is going to be so fringe that Patreon isn't going to be comfortable with it. And if it is, you gotta tell me what it is. But I suspect you are going to be okay. Regardless, if you decide that you want to use a different platform, you want to build something in Mighty Networks or another sort of, or Buy Me a Coffee or one of the other platforms, the things that I've taught today in this lesson, I think are still valuable to you as you move ahead. All right, next one.
What is the Gray Wave?
Oh, the Gray Wave is our membership site, which is designed for baby boomers and Gen X. When I started to have success on YouTube, and I recognized that there weren't a lot of people that look like me, a lot of people that are in their 60s with gray hair making a living on YouTube. And I was afraid that a lot of baby boomers believe that the online space belongs to younger generations and that we don't have a place in it. But we need it because we're increasingly being marginalized, pushed out of jobs. Ageism is a real thing, and a lot of us want to start a side hustle, or we want to continue beyond our existing career. And so we built the Gray Wave to support baby boomers and Gen X who want to start a side hustle, build their own online business, develop a social platform, and basically remain relevant and engaged, regardless of how old they are. So we teach all of the skills that we have as far as creating online courses and delivering content and building a following on YouTube or Twitter or podcasting, how to build a mail list. We teach all of that within the Gray Wave. To dip your toe in it, we do a weekly tutorial called Foundational Friday, which teaches the basic principles. And it could almost be looked at as a prerequisite for the Gray Wave, although you don't have to take it, but it will teach you the type of content that we teach. Coming up this week, we're going to be teaching you how to create a content plan. So April will drop the link for that once she gets the next question online, and you can have a look. But we've got many gray waivers in here who have already, I've seen them already saying, it's awesome. And it is.
Yes, it is.
We got a great community.
Can you set up the amount of money for each tier?
Yeah, that's a part of what we teach. You have total control over that environment. You can have whatever perks you want, and you can even deliver the perks outside of Patreon. We teach you how to do that. So yes, you have total control.
One of the questions was to be clear of the cost. They do charge credit card processing fees.
Yeah, so I mentioned that 2.9% on top of what you see on the Patreon page.
All right. How many subscribers or fans do you need before you suggest starting Patreon?
I suggest you have a solid platform. And I know that sounds like I'm couching my comments, but if you've got 100 followers who are rabid fans, who are rabid followers, you probably have enough to get going. Now, what that means as far as what the real numbers of your mail list or of your subscribers are, I don't know. But the bottom line is, if you have an existing platform, where Patreon, where you will almost guaranteed fail on Patreon, is if you say, I'm starting to build my platform, I'm starting to build a podcast tomorrow, and I'm going to support it on Patreon, and you launch them both in parallel, that does not work. Your podcast has to be mature. Your YouTube channel has to be mature. Your mail list has to be going. You have to have a following of people who are already appreciating the content you deliver. That is when Patreon steps up and becomes viable. Rick,
all right.
I have two different
projects.
If you just put up, I can read them, and you can post you can keep looking for the next one. Rick says, I have 2 different projects to monetize. Can I use 2 separate Patreon pages? Yes, absolutely. Now, if they're closely related, you could make it one if there's crossover. But if there's not crossover, then definitely 2. Because don't forget, you can have different tiers. You could have one tier that's kind of focused on one project and another tier that's focused on the other project. Then you just have one combined one, and you get the benefit of some crossover there. So my preference would always be less, just one. But if that's not possible, if one of your things is home improvement and the other is space exploration, well, yeah, you should have 2.
Does Patreon have a coupon code that could be used for those creators that may have another business and wanting to utilize the membership platforms for select clients as free?
Patreon has a free tier. You can always set up a free tier and deliver free content into Patreon. So yes.
All right.
And you also have the ability within Patreon to demark who gets access to what content based on the tier. So it's not you won't find a coupon code, but everything that you've just said, you can facilitate within Patreon.
How much does the Gray Wave course cost?
Oh, the Gray Wave is not a course, it's a membership. So when you sign up for it, you get access to all of our content in it. April will share the link with you, but there is an enrollment fee of, I think it's $400, and then it's $99 a month ongoing while you're within the community.
All right. Is it hard to set up tiers in Canadian?
So the way that it is now is you set your tiers based on whatever currency you want, and then Patreon will translate that fee into many local currencies, including euros, pounds, US and Canadian dollars, Australian dollars. So if you're in Canada and you set $10 Canadian as a perk level, what you'll see that you get new patrons signing on at $7.50 US, because they're going to be paying in their local currency.
Let's see. The chat moved on me. How do we use Patreon to leverage for a 100-day event?
That is a great question. Patreon is awesome for delivering boot camps, or delivering what do you call them? Any of those kind of consistent events where you get people all on board. In fact, when I send out the emails that you're going to receive, I give an example of PJ Wren, who was my local trainer, and she converted her physical gym into an online service, and she uses challenges and those little sprints and starts to build her Patreon campaign, and she has done marvelously with it. Patreon is a great place for you to set up these challenges because of the nature of how it's all encouraged. It works well from a philosophical point of view for those, but there's also the tools in place for you to manage and create the communication. Because of the post nature of it, people are constantly going in there, updating, and you basically think about it. It's almost like a private Facebook group, but with way more control and way less ambiguity, because Patreon doesn't meter. There's no algorithm that says you're going to get it or not. If people are subscribed to you on Patreon, they get the email, they get the notifications, no questions asked.
What is the best way to grow an email base?
Well, that's building your platform. And that is the art of online business. And I think it's the most important thing that we do in online business. We probably spend all of our time thinking about how you grow email lists. So it's a constant thing. The best way to do it is to create compelling content and find value that is going to encourage your community, your members, to sign up for your list. So we teach it in do we have a free webinar on that? I think Webinar Wednesday we've done a few times. So if you're one of my patrons,
I think we.
If you're on Patreon, if you're one of my patrons, you have access to all of our replays of all of our webinars. We've got several on building an email list and getting started. But really, what you're talking about, building your email list, is the foundational principles of building an online business. It goes hat in hand with all of the things we do. Most of us do something called content marketing, where we teach something, and in return, you start to follow us. Just the model that's happening right now. I'm teaching you about Patreon. I'm teaching you about building an online business. So now you're going to subscribe to my newsletter. You're going to follow me. You're going to sign up for other things. And eventually, hopefully, will become a customer. This model that I'm following right now is the model that you follow in order to build your mail list.
All right. So there's some confusion. So we talked about the Gray Wave, right, which is a completely separate membership. Today, we're talking about Patreon Bootcamp. Yeah. So there's questions on, so like Dan, just to give you, did I hear that correctly? Gray Waivers get access to all your content, including archives of your bootcamp. So do you want to explain that and kind of explain the differences?
Okay, so I think the best way to do it is to look through to check the sales page that covers all of the content that is covered. But all of our courses, all of our earlier courses on online video, on delivering webinars, etc., that's all included in the Gray Wave content, as well as new monthly tutorials that we deliver on vertical topics. This month, we're learning about, what are we learning about this month? It's
SEO.
Or
no,
SEO,
search engine
optimization for your website. So we deliver that content on a monthly basis. It's ongoing. Patreon, because it's a very narrow niche, we decided to deliver this course outside of the Gray Wave, but Gray Wave members can purchase it at a discount. But if you're concerned that there's not enough content, I can promise you one thing: if you join the Gray Wave tomorrow and you did nothing but consume content for the next 2 months, you wouldn't be caught up.
Yeah, there's a lot, and we have Foundational Fridays is included in that too.
Yeah, that's included as well. Yeah.
All right, so let's see, there's some more questions. This Liam asked, you indicated one of the Patreon models was people serializing a story. Can one start a patron account while developing content using the same model alone?
I would say that might be possible if you have the ability to get people in right from the start. So if we're talking about like the beginning of the narrative of the story, if you're delivering serial content, if you're going to drop chapter 1, version 1, if people are following you already and you have people who are interested in your content for other reasons, like because they've read or consumed your content before, yes. If it's your first book and you're starting from scratch, no. Because you're going to be serving to crickets. How are you going to get those first people that are going to engage with you? You still have to have that platform in place. But if you do have one and you're starting a Patreon campaign from, the beginning of a story, yes, that would work.
All right. What recommendations, resources do you have for building the platform?
Oral? Is it Oral? Join our Gray Zone Facebook group where we talk about this constantly, and make sure you're signing up for Webinar Wednesday and all of our related content, because that is what we teach, and we share resources on that every single day. So well, not every single day, but every week we share something on it. So I recommend that you start to follow us, and if you are following us, then we share other resources that kind of tangentially fit with us and the people who I follow. So I won't get into details of who I would follow right now, but if you're following me, you'll definitely hear the different names of the different people and the different sources that we follow. We share every week on Webinar Wednesday. We send out a note which has many, many links to different resources that are all related to the content we're talking about.
So Chef Dennis is asking, so Patreon is good for face-to-face courses? I mean, when you're having a live course.
It would work very well for that. It's got a platform built in that does that has the ability for you to do live streams right within Patreon if you choose to go in that route. It's a heavy lift, though. If you're delivering live content to a community, my concern then is burnout, because serving your community and delivering enough live content, it can be I would be concerned to make sure that I could deliver enough content. But if you're already delivering the content and it's bonus material, or you're giving them, you can find ways to leverage off of your live content. So I wouldn't say that Patreon, the best Patreon perk is delivering weekly live streams, for example. But if you are delivering live cooking classes, Patreon might be the best revenue model for that, because you can then start to add other benefits, and then you perhaps you're sharing a piece of it on YouTube, or I don't think I explained this very well. Let me start again. Sorry, my head is swimming. Yes, it would work for live, but I would be, as I said, I'd be concerned that it's not the main way you deliver content to that community, because you will burn out. I will say that.
All right. Let's see.
Gwen's asking, what are my thoughts if you only want to deliver one tier for $7 at $7? That would be fine. One of the first exercises that we go through in the Patreon bootcamp is we go through deciding exactly what tiers you have. And I have a process and an evaluation system where you can actually score your different perk ideas. I love the idea of less perks and simplifying, because so you don't make your patrons go through analysis paralysis. Too many options, I think, just stops people from doing things, and it gets too confusing to administer, frankly. So I love the idea of one tier, but we have a great exercise that we do right at the beginning, where we evaluate all of the different options that we have in Patreon and then come up with the best one that's going to work for our community. I would prefer, rather than thinking about what perks you offer as you start thinking about your Patreon community, think about your relationship with the community you have and what the essence of that is. And at that point there, once you figure out who the people are, you use the term avatar, but who the people who are going to support you, that you then look at that as a basis for making the decision, rather than an idea of a content piece that you might want to deliver.
Sorry, I was copying the Facebook group. So here's a legal question from Miss Darrell. A legal question: if my 100-day event had pre-existing patrons of a famous,
famous Dutch painter.
Yep, who want a movie and they help me write the movie, how do I explain it might be never made? Selling a script and getting it made are totally different. I think you talk about it. You talk about it being a work in progress, as a dream, as a honesty is the best policy as far as that's concerned. But I think people would get on board, and they would come up with ideas to help you with it. That's just transparency. All right. I think we've answered. Priscilla had
I'll
actually.
Just say this. Remember, your patrons can be co-conspirators or collaborators with you as well. They're vested in your success, and I mentioned that in the webinar, I'm sure, but it's really important to recognize that patrons want you to succeed. There are people here today, when somebody was critical of us emailing too much in advance, you saw people come to our defense to say, I appreciate the way that Steve does his stuff because I follow him and I know. Those are people who support us. That's the attitude that you get from your patrons. And I appreciate that immensely, but it doesn't surprise me that happens, because we have a great relationship with our community, and I work hard to maintain that relationship. And the benefits that come downstream of that relationship are profound. If you have a dream and you bring people on board and you empower them within that dream, they will continue to support you, even if there's little chance of success. Although there might be a lot of chance of success for you.
All right. Priscilla's asking, if I start accumulating valuable content resources in my Patreon account, is there any chance that new members will just come in and download all the materials and cancel their subscription afterwards?
Yes, there's always that chance, Priscilla, but I'm going to go back to what I just said. If somebody does that, what have you lost? Yes, they've taken advantage of you, but that's on them, not on you. And your patrons aren't going to do that. People who support you and believe and want you to create more content are not going to do that. They're going to be in your camp and they're going to support you. The relationship with your patrons is different than a customer relationship. It's not transactional. It's supportive. So there's a chance, and I know people do it to me. People will, for example, with this Patreon bootcamp, I know somebody asked if they sign up as a $10 patron today, can they get it for half price? Yes. And can they take advantage of it? Could they cancel the Patreon subscription at the end of the month and take advantage and have gotten it for free or for half price? Yes. Do I lose a moment of sleep over that? No, because anybody that would do that wasn't going to be my customer anyways, wasn't going to be my supporter anyways. And it just proves over and over again by the people who we have on board who support us, what those relationships mean. And yes, they're a smaller number than we might have as customers, but my gosh, they're so much more valuable.
Somebody was asking if you can take the boot camp down the road when they've built their following.
I'm going to say probably. We are looking. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to offer the boot camp in a non-linear fashion, whereas we're going to take the content and make it available so you can purchase it later and not leader-led, or if we're going to relaunch it again. It's going to depend on the success of this. Is the first time we've done it, and so it's going to depend on how I feel having gone through it. Feedback from the students that go through it or the members that go through it. So there's a good chance. I mean, I believe that what we're delivering is really valuable to Patreon creators, to creators to get on Patreon. So there's a good chance, but I'm not going to promise one way or the other at this point. We just haven't made that decision.
I have a website, Facebook, YouTube channel, and post new content on these platforms and link to Patreon and PayPal for my website. Is this the best sequence? I'm unclear as to how to promote to subscribing.
Yeah, there's probably no problem if you're posting PayPal and giving people an option to do donations. That's what I imagine you're doing? Sure, that's fine, as long as you're demarking clearly the difference between what they're getting and what they're giving you as a donation versus the benefits they're getting from Patreon. Personally, I believe that you're probably better off just going with one and not confusing people. Yeah, I mean, I say that as people who are confused about everything we've offered today, but that is, so I would prefer to have just one, but that's not essential. If it's working for you and you are clearly identifying for both sides, then just keep doing it. Because last thing we want to do is turn away money.
Right. What constitutes a platform that's enough to launch Patreon?
Something, and it'll sound kind of ephemeral, I think, but if you have a strong following, if you have a following that if you are consistently publishing, so even if let's not talk about how many people you have following you at this point. Let's talk about your content publishing process. If you're publishing a new blog every week and you've done so for 40 weeks and you know that you're going to continue to do so for the foreseeable future, you have the potential. If you publish a podcast and you publish every week and you've done so for 20 weeks and you've gotten past that hump and you are going to continue to do it, and even though it's growing slowly, it's growing and you're committed to it, that's a platform. So it's really, I would put the emphasis on, if you are as a content creator, aren't thinking, I'm going to start a podcast that I'm going to deliver every week. That's too early, but I have been doing it. I know I can do it and I'm committed to it. Then you have a platform.
All right.
I like that answer. Thank you for that question.
How is Patreon different from membership, and when should I use which?
Well, we covered that off the top. So if you might have missed the earliest part of the webinar today. So if you watch it again, if you watch the replay, I spend time talking about that. It might have been when we had the technical glitch. Essentially, membership sites are where people are purchasing from you. They're buying. It's like buying a course. They're buying access to something that you're delivering. Patreon, they are supporting you in the development of future content. It's a different attitude, even though it's often pragmatically it looks very similar as far as the content being generated, but it's the relationship you have. Typically speaking, Patreon's going to be a lot lower dollar value, a lot lower dollar commitment than a membership site, and the expectations are a lot less too. Like if you with the membership site, I got to tell you, like we really work hard to make sure that everything is done exactly as we say. On Patreon, not that we would ever let anything slide, but if it's a day late, or if Steve feels sick and he doesn't feel like doing a webinar this week, I don't do the webinar, and my patrons don't give me a hassle. If you're doing a membership site and you say we're going to be delivering this course module on this date, and Steve feels sick, Steve's still doing it because the customers are not going to be happy if not. Is that a good way to put it, April?
To put it, yes. I think that's a wrap, my friend.
Oh, good. I hope that you folks found this valuable. I am truly passionate about this. I keep thinking ahead to a couple of months down the road. I'm so looking forward to seeing what a difference we're going to make in some creators' lives, because I know what a gift a good solid Patreon account is, and how it makes everything every day is a little bit better. And when you get that PayPal or that Patreon notification that you have a new supporter, and you get to reach out to that person and thank them for it, they're not saying I'm buying something from you. And there's nothing wrong. I love getting purchase notifications. Don't get me wrong. For this course, every time that PayPal or Stripe bings and somebody new has bought this course, I'm going to get a lot of satisfaction. But there's a different nurturing satisfaction that comes out of somebody saying, Steve, I support you. There's a whole bunch of people here. You've heard them commenting about what it means to them to be our patrons. I support you. And that is a different type of support that creators really need. And because often we work in a bit of a vacuum. And so I'm very excited to see where the Patreon bootcamp is going to take my creator friends. So with that, April, let's put a bow on this. Let me, all right. I've got some editing work to do before this replay goes out. I know that. Thanks for your patience, everybody that was supportive and added comments and questions. We appreciate that ever so much. There's going to be a fairly compressed email sequence. We have a 5 email sequence, I think, which is our sales cycle for this particular launch. The first email that goes out, there will be a link in the bottom for you to unsubscribe from this follow-up list. If it's something that you're not interested in and you don't want to get these other 5 emails that include things like the financial calculator and the different stories and the different angles of looking at Patreon, then make sure you unsubscribe. You won't unsubscribe from our main list by doing so. You'll just won't get these emails, because for the next few days, there will be a fairly intense, you'll be getting a few a day over the next couple of days. But it's a great sequence to go through. We worked hard on it, and it includes, as a bonus, that Patreon calculator, which I know you're going to love to use. So with that, April, thank you so much for your support. You and I will have to meet. We'll have to have a quick chat on Zoom afterwards to make sure that everything's being done.
Awesome.
For all of you.
Bye, guys.
Till next time, have fun storming a castle.
Thank you.